Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set, cocked, locked? Here we go. You dialed it correctly to USA Prepares. We're delighted you're in class with us today. Nathan is engineering the broadcast in Minnesota at GCN. I'm Vin Finelli. Dr. Richard Allen Miller's with us, and his website is richardallenmiller.com. Richard, A-L-A-N, Miller, M-I-L-L-E-R.com. Welcome, Doc Ram.
Good morning, Vincent. It's nice to have you back, truly.
Hey, it's great to be on the air with you. You know, Rick, I'll tell you what happened. We had no phone, no internet, nothing here at the farm. You know, it just... Yeah, it's a good little fire drill, and it just lets us know how dependent we are on the internet. You know, I couldn't broadcast. I couldn't even call you to say I can't call you. Really, and I talked to a technician last night. They finally, after all this time, they finally figured out what it was. It was a cable cut. So here we are, in the middle of nowhere, and you know, some people have a lot of information in the cloud. They store their backups in the cloud, they store their data in the cloud, and they think it's safe. Well, okay. Well, you know it can be hacked, right, class? But when you have an outage like we had, what do? You can't get to it. So I use the old-fashioned system. I have a Rolodex. I write things down. I write notes. I use highlighters, and I have it. It's all right here, and it's not in the cloud. And just as a reminder, if it's digital, it can be compromised. Okay? If it's digital, it can be compromised. It's as simple as that. It can be hacked, whether it be a bank account. Well, here's the proof. Rick, in Australia, 4 of the major banks in Australia shut down people's bank accounts. They froze them. Because they said, well, there's a security risk. These customers who have accounts with these banks are buying cryptocurrencies. So because they're buying cryptocurrencies, the banks say, well, it's a security risk. The bank is saying that buying a cryptocurrency is a security risk for the bank. Yeah.
Good luck with that, man. Listen, that's all of it is a puff of air. And what we're talking about is the distinction between analog and digital. And I remember when I was listening to my music, and there's something different about analog over digital. Digital is designed from a quantum mechanics point of view with uncertainty principles. That means that your eyeball can't see these bandwidth distinctions from one wavelength to another. And so it is information that's lost. That is what's called a filter. And with analog, the precision goes down into infinity. That means no matter how far down you go in looking at the subatomic levels of things, there's still resolution. And digital presumes you can't see it, so who cares?
Yeah, it's interesting you're saying this, Rick, because I was reading an article about return to vinyl. You know, people are now interested again in LP, long-playing albums made out of vinyl, and that's analog. You're absolutely right. And I was also looking at.
Tracking. Remember how that was?
I'm sorry.
with your player.
I was also looking at the price of stereo equipment from the vintage years. I'm talking about like the 1970s. I was looking at Heathkit. Yeah, and Dynaco, Dynaco, and JBL, James B. Lansing, Alltech Lansing. And so what I found out was there are speaker systems, and I bought some many, many, many years ago. The people at Dynaco seem to have adopted me when I was very young. They liked me. And they would sell me their kits at employee discount, 50% off, which was unbelievable. And I became friends with the technical people at Dynaco, and I could bring my assembled kits to them, and they would tweak them. They would tweak them and show me where I could make changes to improve them. And they had all the test equipment at the factory. And it was really a great arrangement. And I don't know why they adopted me, but they did. And I was able to buy their speakers at 50% off. Well, those speakers are in high demand right now. If you go to eBay and you look up Dynaco A25 speakers, you'll find out they're extremely expensive. Now, brand new, they were $75 each.
How about acoustic research, AR4s? Those speakers, yeah.
Yes, AR4AX.
At least 40 watts just to start to drive them, just to turn them on. That meant you needed a 160-watt amplifier just to get them started.
That's right. And so that was also on my list, AR.
Hold on one second.
Acoustic.
Don't do that one like that. No.
Yeah, so we had some really wonderful companies back then that were interested in the mechanics of audio. Now, what's changed is guys like Bose would change, well, let me say it this way. Acoustic Research, James B. Lansing, Dynaco, they were interested in mechanically making their speakers perform to very high standards. Accurate reproduction.
Yeah, the weight of the windings on your coil determined how good your speaker was.
Mm-hmm, that's right. And what happened since then is companies have figured out, we don't have to do that. We can have these little tiny speakers instead of these, 10 and 12 and 15-inch woofer speakers for the low sounds. We'll just change it electrically. So they made electronics to manipulate the audio so that inferior, in my opinion, speakers could sound much better. And that's what they did.
You won't be able to break a glass with the newer speakers, yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, so that was one of the things that I was thinking about, with the analog versus the digital. But digital has taken over. But that doesn't mean it's necessarily better. And here's another anecdotal piece of evidence. IBM came out with their initial PC, and it was an 8-bit processor. But Texas Instruments came out with an 8/16-bit PC, which was way better. Commodore 64 came out with a computer that was way better than that. But what actually grabbed the market? It was the IBM PC, the inferior PC in terms of technology. So we have marketing. Marketing can take a product that is inferior and really make it do well in sales. And I was thinking about that this morning as well. And I was thinking about what I consider dumb names for things. Dumb names. Like, how, if I were creating a company, would I name it Facebook? I mean, that's ridiculous in my mind. Facebook? There's got to be a better term than that. But however, Facebook has made billionaires. Yeah.
Yeah,
Facebook.
Like AOL started that. It was started with AOL, and then it moved to cameras. And the cameras, I remember when we used to talk about the 200 shades of gray.
Yeah, I remember 16. 16 shades of gray.
China has 200 shades if you look at their mountains, but the resolution of the one shade of gray to the other, and now with cameras, we no longer have that. I have a little Sony that is just exceptional. I just take it anywhere I go, and I don't need my big lenses and lighting. I don't need to have to worry about my f-stop. I mean, it's all good to go, just like that.
Yeah, I was turning around in the studio looking for my Argus, A-R-G-U-S, C3 camera, my very first 35 millimeter camera.
And remember the Kodaks, they print on demand. There's your print on demand, man. Look, the whole thing has gone down into a big black hole, and that's the distinction between looking at space-time over information.
You know, it's interesting that you mentioned cameras. If you think about, like, back in the 60s, if you mentioned a camera, there would be another word associated with that, and that would be Kodak. Because you really couldn't have a camera without film. You couldn't have film without developing chemicals and papers to
silver
print
chloride. There it is.
Yeah. And so, how have things changed? When you say camera today, you think of Sony, right? You think of Canon, maybe. You think of, well, I used to think of Olympus.
I know.
Kodak's not even.
Olympus. That's what I did. I couldn't afford the higher grade Canon, so I went to I went to Sony. There you go. I hate what's going on in our world in values and why we do what we do, and it's subtle. It's subtle, and but it is different, and that's the distinction between the so-called uncertainty principle and the concept that information is not really what you think it is.
Mm-hmm. And just getting back to Kodak for just a second, Kodak was the player, absolutely the big player in photography, no question about it. And Kodak was so big, Rick, I got a tour of the Kodak factory in Rochester, New York. And when I went there,
Jack Benny.
Yeah, when I went to Kodak, I got a tour, and to get a tour, I got in this golf cart inside the factory, and we rode and rode and rode, and it was huge. And why did they have golf carts in the factory? Because they needed them. That's how. And it was like the equivalent of a subway. But there were golf carts all over this factory to shuttle people back and forth. And they had guys who were in charge of just driving people around on the golf carts. Class Doc Ram's with us, docram.com, Dr. Richard Allen Miller. And we were talking about Kodak, and I just wanted to share something, an interesting fact. The name Kodak, K-O-D-A-K, was devised by George Eastman. George Eastman was the founder of Eastman Kodak. And his mother and he were playing with an anagram set, and they were looking for a name that met three principles. One, the name had to be short, a name that could not be mispronounced, and a name that would not resemble anything or be associated with anything else except their business. That would eventually be called by the name Kodak. And one other point of information about that is they wanted a name that, regardless of the language, it would be pronounced the same way, whether it be Japanese, German, Spanish, English, it would be pronounced Kodak. And that's the name that they came up with. And I just wanted to share that short story with you.
How
and
about
it was
this
a fabulous.
Yeah, I've got one to add to that one. My mother, Catherine Ada Nelson, was his private secretary for Indochina Theater.
You're talking about George Eastman's
secretary. That's why I grew up in the Philippines. I was stuck in Buddhist missionary camps while Mom was running his business in China.
Wow.
Did you know that?
Very interesting.
Yeah.
No, I
then
didn't.
She came home and became like a Gordon Duff with a thing called Vesta Cutting and Associates, which was a spy network, basically, an industrial spy network. Mm-hmm. Vesta Cutting. It's out of Seattle, and what she did is she formed an employment agency that was employer pays the fee, and Mom would place executive vice president secretaries for all the big businesses in Seattle, including Boeing and Continental Can and Bethlehem Steel and those kinds of things. And they all worked for my mom.
Wow.
Yeah, I grew up in that environment, and I was just a little nerd. I had no clue. And my dad was a plasma physicist, and he left Boeing to work for Mom, and they ended up with a 4th and Pike building. Of course, my dad spent my inheritance after Mom died with his new girlfriend. It was cool. And that was an interesting thing. That's how I got into Kodak and filming and like that. I had that background right as a little child.
Now, you mentioned industrial spying, right?
Yes.
Can you go back to that for a couple minutes?
Sure. What?
Yeah, tell us what industrial spying is.
Knowing what's going to happen before the universe does and the releases of new technology. Mm-hmm. That's one area. The idea that we're no longer going to have this, we're going to have that, like a cloud. Mm-hmm. Mom was on the edge, and she technically, she's really, really smart. That's where I got my my basics. And then my father taught me how to do things with my hands. That meant that anything I touched in the laboratory worked. I don't know how that happened. I just had a gift that if I soldered something, it worked. I remember in grad school, there were 13 of us graduate students at Delaware, and each of us built a single unit and of optical going from infrared down into visible light region that were used in Vietnam. We made the first prototypes for what we would call infrared goggles, and each graduate student did it, and we all did it at the same time, and mine was the only one that worked the first time out, right out of the gate. I was methodical in that regard. I'm not very, anything else I do, I'm more circular, but in that regard, I was just very linear. I just did it by the numbers, and it always worked.
And I find that I'm doing it by the numbers, too. Very methodical, step by step. And it seems like that's the only way I can make it work. I can't.
Well, that is the only way you can make it work.
Oh, okay. Because I was going to say, shortcuts aren't working so well.
Yeah, exactly. Metaphor.
Yeah. When we come back, I want to share with you something that I learned about when I worked for a Fortune 100 company, competitive products. And it wasn't industrial spying, but it was the next best thing. We'll be right back. My very first job after leaving the university was with a Fortune 100 company. And I was very fortunate. Mrs. Finelli was going on an interview, and I decided to go with her. We were dating at the time, and I decided to go with her, and I did some research on the company. I went to the library, and I learned everything I could find out about the company. I spent well over a day just researching this one particular company where she was going to interview. And I was in the waiting room, and I thought, I'll just fill out an application. So I filled out this application. Next thing I know, she's in her interview, and the person in charge of personnel, that's what they called it back then, before they called it human research, came out and said, I'd like to interview you. And so we had this interview. Next thing I know, I was hired. They hired me. They brought me to the financial department of the corporation, and I interviewed with the person there, and next thing I know, I'm hired, and I was what was called a financial analyst. And as a financial analyst, oh, by the way, Mrs. Finelli got the job, too, so it really worked out well. And so we commuted to work together, about 60-something miles, 66 miles each way. And so as a financial analyst, I got to look at all kinds of neat stuff that this was the real deal. This wasn't like from the university. This was the big league. And I was looking at budgets. And that was my job, to look at budgets and to forecast what was going to happen and how much money could be spent in different areas by different departments. That was my job. And there was a line item called competitive products. And so literally, class, this is absolutely true. There was money allocated in the budget to buy competitors' products in the open market, to take them apart, dissect them, reverse engineer them, figure out what the competitors were doing that might be better or worse than what we were doing. And I'm sure they had a guy just like me at their corporation who was looking at budgets, figuring out how much money should be spent on competitive products as well.
They even had someone hired to take you away from one company to another.
Yeah, that's right. And the term that they used was called headhunters.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah, and I would get calls from headhunters, and they were these. Well, would you call them spies? Kind of like spies, Rick.
Spies? Could it be?
Well, yeah, because what the headhunters would do is they would call you, and it'd be kind of a clandestine call, and, hey, I'd like to talk to you and learn more about what you're doing, and, boy, it sounds like you have a really interesting position there. Can we have lunch? And then you go and you meet with these guys. Tell me this isn't right. This is right. Yeah.
The world turns like that. If that's what Mom had old man DuPont at my graduation at Pullman. She didn't even come to my graduation. He did.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Wow, I had no clue. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What? Who? Mm-hmm. I was very disappointed. My parents were never interested in anything I did.
Really? Now, my understanding is DuPont and family, they were the guys who were making gunpowder for the Revolutionary War.
They were technical. They ruled the waves. That was where Navy hung out, was the old man DuPont. Mm-hmm. That Navy was the military version of technology. That's why they started with Annapolis. That's where they had their own university, etc. You got a wakey.
and so the test question for our class is, if you were in the restroom at one of the DuPont's houses and the towels were monogrammed in the bathroom, what letter would be the prominent letter for the monogram? The letter is P for DuPont. Yes, absolutely true. And just a little bit of trivia. But, Rick, so we bought our competitors' products, and we dissected them to make our products as good as we could and better than our competitors, and we tried to lower the cost. And just as an interesting side note, has nothing to do with physics, but, class, you might find this interesting. One of my jobs, and it was tough, it was a really tough job, back in the 1970s, was to come up with an analysis that would show how much cost went into building one of our products, because we wanted to put on the box "Made in America," made in USA.
There you go.
Literally,
that's the bottom line. There used to be pride in our products. And that's one of the things that got flushed down the toilet early on with the deep state, New World Order bullshit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, what happened was I spent time looking at the product that I was working on was an electronic product. It was not necessarily for consumers per se, but for industry. And I looked at every single cost I could think of, ferret out, to put into this equation to make it so that more than 2/3 of the product cost was domestic. And it was tough. It was right on the line. I mean, when you think about it, the power cord, just buying the power cord versus making the power cord, buying the power cord from Asia or making the power cord in the United States was enough to switch this thing from being able to be called Made in USA versus not Made in USA. I'll tell you how technical it got. It got to, where's the box for the product made? Where are the staples for the box made? Where's the ink for the label on the box made? Where's the manual made? Where are the staples that go in putting the manual together?
From assemble to made, because assemble is different than made.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I've got a compressor here at the farm, and it was I bought the best compressor I could find for the money, the best value, and it ended up being a little less than $400, 300 and change, and it says there's a great big USA on it, and you look at it and you think, wow, USA? No, it's like assembled in USA from parts from.
Yeah, exactly, man. That's that. They got you coming and going. I'll tell you, like telephones.
Yeah. yeah. Well, I can't imagine. Well, all right, let's go back to telephones. Rick, when Western Electric made telephones back in the 1960s, 1970s, you could bang on them. You could slam down the receiver, and it would just take it, and it just kept working, right? Well, I can't imagine doing that with today's electronics that are made in Asia.
I know. You know what I just did to you? You don't even. I used you are affectionately known as a hair trigger. You got that one, didn't you? Okay, good. So that's exactly how our world is changing. Keywords. And the way we trigger them, not what is actually being said. That's neurolinguistics. And that's where your real mind control, and is the distinction between persuasion and passing information. And that's the distinction between Chinese and the Anglo-Saxon forms or mother letters used in Hebrew. And I am becoming more aware of these subtleties of digital to analog. It is an interesting play on the limitations of our senses. Did everybody get that, class? I'm going to test you next week on it, and we're going to have a quick exam.
I was thinking about what you're saying, Rick, and I was thinking about analog and how, let's say, the government would say, well, let's listen to that person's voice. Is it the same as this other recording we have? Let's compare them. And they would compare them, and they'd use an oscilloscope, and they'd look at the wavelengths and so forth. Well, now we can take someone's voice and we can duplicate it exactly with no distortion.
Yeah, I'd like to see someone do floor preem.
No distortion.
Good luck with that.
Well, is that true? No distortion whatsoever with digital?
That's distortion, again, has several possible definitions. And so yes and no. Okay. That's going to be the first problem we encounter when we have a close encounter with an AI.
Yes, because we can be, tell me if I'm wrong, but I don't think so. We could be on screen, on image, put in a place where we were not. We could be made to say things we didn't say, and there could be a video with our voice.
I have just, while I was talking to you, I completed an email response to one of my fans that is nails it. And I did it while we were doing this because of our conversation. And it might be instructive because this guy, he says, Happy New Year. I apologize for my delay in my question. So question first is, how is a C60 different from activated charcoal? Now, it's the same conversation we've just had. Is C60 absorbed in the gut, or does it absorb toxins in the gut similar to activated charcoal? Now, what he's really asking, and say this article that he sends me says that, we've had activated charcoal in our system for bazillions of years. Do you need to go? Yes, you do. Okay, we'll pick this up at the other end.
Yeah. Going into a commercial break. Dr. Richard Alan Miller and I will talk about C60 when we come back. Class, if you'd like to go to Rick's website, Dr. Richard Allen Miller, it's richardallenmiller.com. Richard, A-L-A-N, Miller, M-I-L-L-E-R.com. Rick, you were talking about C60.
Oh, boy, I'm going to do one on you guys today. I've got a plan, and I'm going to lay it out right now. Here we go. So this guy wants to know what the difference is between the advertised fluorine waters and olive oil and, fixing telomerase and reducing aging and da-da-da-da-da-da-da to activated charcoal. And my response, I'm going to semi-read it because it's interesting. I just sent it, so I need to pull it back up here and read it to you because I wrote it to him while you and I are talking about the various things with Kodak, etc. So he sent me this article, and I thanked him for the article that he sent. It's a guy that's talking about how he's not very impressed at overpriced fluorine water, and what's the difference between that and activated charcoal? Well, the same differences have to do with analog to digital. And what I did is I sent him back, I said, responding to your question, I sent him the differences between activated carbon and versus charcoal. Now, that's the difference between one thing and another. The fluorine he discussed, which is not in the article that he sent me, is the concept of structured water. That is the key to why it works and why imagination is reality. That concept is how you are able to take your imagination and make it real. It is psyche into matter. And that distinction is going to be held in the way we go from one model of our universe, which was digital first with quantum mechanics, breaking it down to elementary particles, nothing smaller, blah, 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 and the concept of holographic, which deals in resolutions of information. Now, that third download I sent him is for February issue of Nexus Magazine, which is titled The Illusion of Reality. Now, basically, what we're experiencing today, right now, this conversation, our conscious waking state. Fundamentalists, they say, that's it, there's nothing else, and altered states are, the devil. I completely disagree. In fact, God gave us these gifts where we can do things in those universes that are not possible in a digital world we call reality. And there are sidebars, and there are subtle differences between one and another, and in that one over here, you can change your ability in guessing. We used to call that ESP. Oh, that's a no-no word, just like hypnosis was considered a no-no word. And now hypnosis is a valuable tool in the regulation of pain. Now, I'm going to go further on this. The idea that we have lost something and in our modern world is absolutely correct. And what distinguished the concepts of tribes with the shaman, the seer, the one that could see beyond what everybody else could see. American Indian, if you went into the original videos with John Boehm and others, American Indian could not even see a boat on the horizon because they had no concept of that. It was a shaman that could see the boat. And because they didn't have a concept of something floating in the ocean. They didn't know about the New World or the Old World or whatever world they were working on with this epoch. And all of us have been here before and instinctively know when something's correct. That would suggest right out of the gate, the truth is not in the written word, it's in the response, your individual response inside. That's where it starts, not out there. It's not about a prophet, it's about your response to a prophet. And that's different for every single person. And the very thing that Christianity separates it from Muslim.
Fine. Everyone all set? Cocked, locked. Hour number 2 of USA Prepares. Dr. Richard Allen Miller's with us. Richard, A-L-A-N, Miller, M-I-L-L-E-R.com. You know, Rick, I got a call from a friend recently during this extreme cold weather that we're having here in Missouri. And he was telling me that he blew some fuses to his new heating system. And it's a heat pump. And I've been over to his house, and I know about his heating system. It's gas-fired hot water. And I think the hot water heating system is probably the best there is, in my opinion. Now, it's certainly not very good for air conditioning. As a matter of fact, it doesn't work at all for air conditioning. But in terms of heating, it's a great heating system because it's quiet, it's efficient, and it works for years, pretty much trouble-free, and it's not dusty as compared to hot air systems, forced hot air systems. And anyway, so he called me up and he said it's kind of chilly at his place, and I said, my response was, what makes you special? And because we were at 62 degrees in our house, we're having a real tough time heating our house, and we've done the things that you would expect in cold weather. We put sheets over the windows at night, and to help insulate a little bit, make sure there's no drafts under the doors, and we closed off the registers to the rooms that were we don't need to heat, and we've done all that, and we still can't get it above 62. Okay, we heat with wood. And so I kind of was teasing him, like, what makes you special, because we're freezing over here too. And what happened was his heating contractor said something like this: well, on those, if it's cold in the morning, you just turn on this heat pump and it'll take the chill off. Well, it was 0 degrees, and what happened was he turned on his heat pump and the fuses blew on his heat pump. And we talked about it, and I said, I don't know if your guy told you this or not, but heat pumps don't work below 25 degrees, literally. Because how a heat pump works, class, is a heat pump moves heat from one location to another. Now, if a refrigerator has a heat pump, and what it does is it takes the heat out of the box, called the refrigerator, and it dumps it to the coils. And the coils dump that heat into the surrounding air. So if you've got a refrigerator in your kitchen, you can feel the coils are warm, the refrigerator's cold. So what it's done is it's pumped the heat out of the refrigerator box to the coils. Well, a heat pump in the winter, if you have one, does the exact opposite. It takes the heat out of the outside air and dumps it in the house. If you've ever felt an air conditioner, a window unit, it blows hot air out the back, and inside it blows cold air. So what it really does is it takes the heat out of the inside of the room and dumps it outside the house. Well, when he turned on his heat pump, he was looking for heat from 0 degree weather. And it's really hard to find a lot of heat in 0 degree outside weather. And the cold machinery of the heat pump, the compressor, was the surge of power needed to start the compressor was greater than the fuses could handle, and the fuses blew. Now, that is, I'm just describing that to go to a much bigger problem. And the bigger problem is, right now, America's power grid is showing signs of strain during this brutal cold. What does that mean? Well, some of the power generation plants in New England are running short on fuel oil to generate electricity. In the Midwest, some facilities are having trouble finding gas to run their power generation systems. So when you think that everything will be okay, just turn the thermostat up, if you're cold, we may not be able to do that whenever the heck we feel like it. Now, I know that for a fact because if I want to turn the thermostat up, I've got to cut more wood. I've got to burn more wood. I've got to burn more fuel. And I think twice about doing it because it's not all that much fun cutting wood. Well, it is for the first 10 minutes, but after that, it's not fun. Rick, are you concerned about our energy power distribution grid in situations like we're having right now with this extreme cold across the country?
I remember when I lived in the Okinawgans, I would get up at 4 in the morning because there would be frost on the inside bedroom walls. Yeah, I've been there, done that with consciousness. Mm-hmm. And what happens next is your hands start to make you look like you're an old man. Chop wood, carry water. I have been there and done that, and I'm now realizing that it is the way we think that limits what we can be and do. And I am always interested in pushing the envelope. And so, yeah, of course, the whole concept is wrong in terms of grid. We should be decentralized in our organization, just like towns are different than cities. And it's a concept of becoming interdependent, and then that's where the technology goes off to right field every time for the fly ball, with the idea of planned obsolescence because of marketing. And the whole thing is contrived. It's all about the dollar. And this crypto stuff that's coming out now, my tech support has come up with some great metaphors on what the Bitcoin and what it does and what it is and how it can be regulated over what the banks currently do with Rockefeller and Rothschild. And yes, there's a war going on for your mind. It's very subtle, and I spotted it right away, and I spotted it in the distinction of analog to digital. And it's going to require circular rather than linear thinking. And the two are why each of us have two brains and are basically a closed system. That means it has limitations. And what happens next is when Vincent Finelli interfaces with Richard Miller, 3, 4, and 5 other universes are created because of the interface of two limited systems. And you have that fuzzy logic is another form of mathematics that is why you have hysteresis and wiggle room. Is that the right word? Going from one system to another.
Yeah.
Well,
that's a term we used to use.
It doesn't mean it's a better way. It's a way. Mm-hmm. Now, a way opens these doors, and that way opens those doors. And often, they're mutually exclusive of each other. And that's membrane physics, which is simple Bessel functions. And so I'm trying to work in a universe where the assumed truths and definitions, listen, originally, definition of assumed truth was the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. That's Euclidean. Now, what's happening now is that we're discovering that space is curved. Time holes, warps, and, beam me up. And with that concept, now we're realizing that space and time are curved based on gravity. And the concept now is the shortest distance is not necessarily a straight line because you can bend space. Well, now, if that's true, I can, with specific mathematics, prove that the Earth's flat. That doesn't mean it's flat. It simply shows the limitation of physics and religion, why the two of them do not hold the answer. They are a closed system, and why we have two brains. And that's why Two-Face in Batman says, I'm of two minds of this. Now, you have a choice. Go flip that coin. Is it going to land heads or tails? And guess what? God does not play dice in my universe. So with that said, randomness is not truth. Chaos does not rule. It is, in fact, the principle of order and assemblage. And I have chosen to go this way over that. And guess what I discovered? I have made a breakthrough where I am now about to come out of the box with a new book. Yes, no, not the non-local mind. I've chosen to do that in June. That book will be out in June, by the way. Everybody, the non-local mind will be available in June. February, I'm coming out with Pantheon, Archetypal Gods in Daily Living. There's a reason I'm doing this. I have metaphor working in that's what Pantheon is. It's metaphor. The idea in one of my Power Tools books of using God's, by the way, that book, it's got 22 chapters. It's based on the I Ching. That's my system of 8 different worlds, like neurotransmitters. In fact, I believe I'm onto something in terms of being able to open a door where it allows me to take psyche into matter using the concept of structured water. I just completed my first comic on structured water. It's a manga comic for Japan, and using Jerry Pollack's works. And I've hit upon something that's so exciting that I think it's going to change and revolutionize the entire world. And I don't, it's not me. I'm an aggregate of all the professors that tried to teach me what I don't. And all the ministers that tried to teach me what they know. And what I've done is found a center between the two. It's called the moment. In time, you don't go forward and backwards in time. You are at this moment. When you go backwards in time, that's where you take your brain and restructure it for memory. And that exact hologram, that moment, you stored that memory. That's time travel. And there it is in your mind's eye. And basically, because time is a concept, not a reality.
Yeah, we'll be right back. I'm calling it a documentary. You know, like The House of Cards is a documentary, like Scandals is a documentary. I believe there's a lot of truth in what we're seeing in this TV series called The Americans. And it's about it's a spy. It's a story about spies, husband and wife, their children, the murders, the mayhem, the lies, the double crossing, triple crossing, quadruple crossing, the use of people, finding their weaknesses, exploiting their weaknesses. And it's set in the 1980s during the Regan years. And it's the KGB versus the FBI. And it's how ruthless these people are, how devoid of morals they are. And, Rick, the reason I'm mentioning it, there's several reasons why I'm mentioning this. Have you seen the series?
No, I haven't.
Okay. You may want to consider watching this. There's unnecessary sex in it. However, what they do is they exploit the weaknesses of people whom they want to get information from. It's really industrial espionage. It's well, we signed a treaty that we're not going to create biological weapons. But the Russians say, yeah, we signed a treaty, but we don't believe the Americans are abiding by it. And they're developing these bioweapons in Fort Detrick, Maryland. So we need to find out what they're doing so we can make our own. You know, that kind of thing. And it's keeping up with the Joneses, except at the country level. And so many of the things that they bring up in this series ring true to me. And one of the things that they were talking about, the episode I saw last night, was thinking with your gut. Something that you've been talking about for years, thinking with your gut. So it looks like that has gone to television about thinking with your gut and the accuracy of thinking with your gut. So you may want to watch this, but you're going to have to watch hours and hours to get to the point where to get to thinking with your gut. So I just wanted to share that. I think it's an excellent, excellent series on how the world really works behind the scenes. And, you find in the news that people are killed or people disappear. And when you watch this, I think you're going to see some of the reasons why. People know things that that others wish they didn't know. So, well, to prevent that information from getting out, they die. And there are terrible events in this. I mean, it's gut-wrenching. But I think it's necessary for us to consider seeing this, to see how the world probably really works. So, the Americans. Rick, on your Facebook page, you talk about there's a post, making cannabis oil. You want to talk about that?
Yeah? Which oil?
Well,
THC or PBS? It's an initial concept. They're quite cannabinoids and cannabinols.
Uh-huh.
Which one?
The one for health would be the one I'd like to focus on if we can.
Cannabinoids are better than morphine and opiates by orders, plural, of magnitude. That's one of the reasons Boeing chose it as one of the 6 most important plants in the world when they did their studies of lunar base Alpha 1. I was there. I watched Pilgrim. Art Pilgrim does all the hydroponic systems now for Dubai. I don't know if you've followed their technologies, but they're like using LEDs now because a light bulb is primarily wasting energy in heat. And they burn out at some point, and while you have light, you also have heat. That's why it gets hot, and that's called energy losses because it's not doing what it's supposed to do. Whereas an LED is bandwidth specific. That's your digital again, over analog. And a plant, broccoli, wants these bandwidths over celery that wants those bandwidths. And so by using an LED, which is a cold, doesn't lose a lot of energy, very bandwidth specific, a plant in your new hydroponic systems called aquaponics, vertical systems will, in fact,
hold that thought. Class, we've got Doc Ram with us, DocRam.com, Dr. Richard Allen Miller. Kyle in Montana is joining us. Welcome, Kyle.
Hey, good morning, Vince. Good to hear your voice, and yours too, Dr. Miller. I was going to mention a couple of things. Now, I didn't catch the very first part of your program today, so I did not know if you know, but you do have a live line now. Did you know that, Vince?
Oh, that's great. Do you have the number?
Yes, I do. I've memorized it. 605-562-6564.
Okay. 605-562-6564.
Yep, that's carrying you live now. During it was one of the latest numbers that we ever could get you on, and they've got you back. And I was going to weigh in on the lighting because you were mentioning that earlier. I had in my kitchen, my wife's kitchen more than me, but anyway, we had a 4-foot fluorescent fixture in here that was the old design with 4 40-watt tubes in it. And so I decided that, of course, that's pulling in about 1.5 amps of power. And so I went down to the store and we were looking around and we found a system, a plain fluorescent fixture that just had 2 tubes, one on each side. And so I went and started talking to some of the guys that really knew a lot more about these LED tubes than I did. And anyway, he was telling me, said, the old ballasts will not fire the LED tubes. You have to have the electronic ballasts. And so it was about $14. And then they had a set of 6 of these LED 4-foot tubes that would go right into a normal fluorescent fixture, twin pin fixture. 4 of them for, I think it was $14 or something along those lines. But what was interesting about this was the K value. of these lights. I found out that 6,500K is pure direct sunlight visibility level. All right, and if you drop to 5,000K, it's still bright white, but not quite as bright as the 6,500. But I couldn't get 6,500 tubes for this LED fixture, but I put two 5,000K, 14-watt tubes. So each one is 14 watts. So the whole thing went from 160 watts to 28 watts with this, and gets way more light in our kitchen with those two LED tubes that are 5,000K than we did with four of the 40-watt regular.
I'd like to add to that also. There's another point. Kiva does a similar project using the old ways, but without the long ultraviolet, which is why those kinds of original lamps are very hard on the eye. They will damage your eye like a tungsten filament will at some point because of the sharper edges of long ultraviolet that are coming through.
Okay, are you referring, Dr. Miller, to the 5,000K
yes, I am.
Being bad?
Yeah, being bad for your eyes. That's why all those buildings at Boeing, everybody's gone blind from working there now. I'm just kidding. But that is the truth of it. Old fluorescents are toxic. And Kiva came out with a screening method to screen out the long ultraviolet so that it was a softer, what we call softer light. The LED is now a whole different technology that is bandwidth specific for plants and or humans in terms of what you need to see because of the way your receptors, your eyes work. They're not receptors, actually. They're filters. And that's what you need to always remember, that your senses are filtering information into digital over what is actually happening as analog.
Rick, I've got a question. I'm a little confused. So
remember,
well,
you only get half of what I said.
Yeah, well, I didn't even get half of it yet. I'm working on half. So, Rick, Kyle was talking about 6,500 degree Kelvin as pure sunlight. He said he went down to 5,000 degree, which is what he was able to obtain in LED. Are you saying that we need to be concerned about long ultraviolet at the 5,000 degree Kelvin LED lighting system?
Well, yeah. I mean, long ultraviolet for human is toxic, whereas a plant, hemp, marijuana, medical, it loves those longer bandwidths.
Okay, let's get down to a lower.
Again, capillary action in structured water, which was chapter 1 in my comic book.
All right, let's talk about this. And I'm sure Kyle's got similar questions. So I've been experimenting with 5,000 degree Kelvin lighting. And, in the shop, in the auto shop, it works great because we're able to see better. But in the kitchen and in the living quarters, I like 3,000 degree. And in the middle, there's 4,100 degree Kelvin. So are you saying that we have less to be concerned about at wavelengths less than 5,000 degrees?
Yes, and worse, each room will be different because it sets the mood. That's what lighting does.
All right, so Rick,
is an interesting concept. And that comes from the other concept called metaphor, where you're making a leap from one system to another that are unrelated, but not really.
All right, let's go back.
That part is your imagination.
Let's go back to lighting.
Of everything alive.
Now, you've been in our kitchen. Kyle has not. Kyle and class, we have oak cabinets, white oak, and they're stained clear. And so I have these can lights over the counter that shine down from the ceiling, 10-foot ceiling, onto the cabinets and the counter. And what I've noticed is I've experimented with the 4,000 degree Kelvin, 5,000 degree, and 3,000 degree. The 3,000 degree is nice and warm. It's that color of the incandescent 60-watt light bulb that that I grew up with, that you grew up with, that I like. Well, the 5,000 degree Kelvin can light retrofit right next to the 3,000. The 5,000 makes the cabinets look like they need to be refinished. They're all washed out in appearance.
Because that's why we all now need reading glasses, and why we go from 1 to 1 rather than 1.5. Because it isn't about losing your eyesight and getting old. It's about the way the eye works best with light.
All right, so Rick, for safety purposes, are we damaging our eyes if we look up at a 5,000 degree Kelvin light?
Of course you are.
Okay, how about fluorescent versus LED?
No, I wouldn't
the same
use
thing?
fluorescent.
You would
I
not?
wouldn't dream of it. And back even in the 70s, my warehouse used Kiva, which is a brand that puts a filter and taking some absorption filter that does not allow that to come out of the lamp.
Okay, so for those of us who have LED lights or want them, are we better off with 2,500 degree Kelvin, 3,000?
It depends on which room again. Remember, I told you it's about mood.
Yeah,
And
well,
then
in the
you
kitchen.
need to
In the
see
kitchen.
things like you're reading or you're working on a device in your vice. That might need a different kind of lighting because you can't see it without reading glasses, getting down into the page and reading it more accurately. So it's a question of function, and we're finding that everything is different now because we're redefining our assumed truths of what light means.
Wow. And boy, this is ringing true because our son has an area where he works on fine detail. And so I put in these 3,000 degree Kelvin can lights over his work area, 4 of them. And he said, I don't like them. I thought, really? Are you kidding? These are great. This is what I'm using in the studio. He says, no, I didn't like them. And so I replaced them with 5,000 degree. He loves them.
That's the detail aspect. Whereas if you're in a more relaxed, not reading mode, but working with people, it's softer. And in the bedroom, where you're watching TV, you usually have the light down low, etc., etc., etc. And now you're starting to understand what the concept of habitat might imply with plants, animals, and humans.
I've got one more question, and I'm sure Kyle's got some too. Dimmers. Now, with these LED lights, you can use dimmers, but what the dimmers do is they cycle the LEDs on and off at a very, very fast rate, thousands of times per second. Is that a concern for you as well? Because you're talking about mood lighting. You can dim an LED light with a dimmer, which is a computer control. It doesn't look like it, just a little slider switch that appears to be like a regular dimmer, but it cycles those LEDs on and off thousands of times, and it does, I guess you'd call it time division, powering these LEDs.
Isn't that an interesting concept? Time division.
Yeah, well, that's what it's got. It's got to be time division, right? Division of off versus on. So it would cycle it.
Going from the profane into the sacred.
Yeah.
How about the concept of going from here to there, huh? You can't get here from there. That kind of thing?
Yeah. You mean the first step? You want to take several steps?
Getting off the couch and starting the work that you're supposed to be doing.
So are you concerned? Rick, are you concerned about the dimmers making LED lighting?
I'm not concerned at all. I just laugh at everything anymore because it's all beyond me anyway.
Kyle, I'm sure you've got some questions. Would you like to ask them after we return from the break?
Sure.
Okay, great. Kyle in Montana, USA Preparedness Instructor. It's always great to hear from you, Kyle. And it's really interesting how Kyle's life and mine parallel. We independently, without talking about it, we're experimenting with the same kinds of things. Very interesting. We'll be right back. Dr. Richard Allen Miller's with us. RichardAllenMiller.com. Richard, A-L-A-N, Miller.com. If you'd like to peruse his offerings and buy his books, That's the website, Richard, A-L-A-N, Miller, M-I-L-L-E-R.com. Kyle, your thoughts? You had some questions?
Well, I just had a couple of thoughts on this.
Kyle
when
there?
I was doing... Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Hear you now, yep. Yeah, go
Okay.
ahead.
I was just had a couple of thoughts. When I was doing some reading on this, you know, they tell you that the more sunlight you can get, the better your mood will be. They say one of the problems with, not getting enough sunlight and D3 level in particular in the wintertime is one of the things that leads to depression and a bunch of other stuff.
Vitamin D.
Yeah, okay. So my question is this, if 6,500 Kelvin is the closest thing to bright sunlight, then, and 5,000 is very detail-oriented. When I was experimenting with it, sort of like Vincent, we went down to 4160, but I like his son, I didn't like those either, because it seems like you couldn't see, and plus it makes the mood, to me, feel more, depressing, sort of. And I was curious because the 5,000 just makes everything feel perky, and I mean, it feels good to me. It just doesn't hurt. You know, it doesn't feel brash or harsh or anything. And I was just curious, why that would be if it was detrimental.
That's because you're an alien and you need a different bandwidth. Just kidding. They used to put lights around your monitor, your screen monitor, because that's what you stare at, not the sun. And the sun today is different than when I remember the sun being yellow when I was a kid. What's going on? Pole shift. And all these space launches, basically, I think the owners of Earth are coming back to pick up our rent. What do you think? I don't know. I don't know. I can guess, and the guessing is actually where the truth is, because that's where you make the leap of changing things from analog to digital. And if anybody gets that, then you're going to get the bigger picture of what's really going on here with imagination and why our Earth is now in trouble. And I have a thought on how to change that, and it's not going to be kumbaya. So, it's interesting how Vincent and I have a plan, and it never happens. He knows what I'm saying. It's all cool.
Yeah.
It's all cool, because the spontaneity part is where the real truth lies.
Years ago, class, and Kyle, years ago, I mentioned that what I do is, just before the broadcast, I'll call Rick and we'll chat for a few minutes about what we're going to talk about. And we decide, these are the 5, 6, 7 items we're going to talk about. And that's the last time we talk about them.
It's wonderful working with Vincent, because we how did she say it in that one movie? We make quite a pair, Raggedy Man.
Well, I had a boss. He used to say, I went to an event, and it was, dress up for the event, and he said, "Wow, you really clean up good."
Oh, man. And the headhunters, all of it, it all goes down into the point, and that's the pointless forest.
Well, Rick, I think, and Kyle, I think some of our problems, probably most of our problems, are because of the sum of all of our individual greed. And, I'm talking about corporate greed. And one of the things I'm talking about is inventing solutions for problems that don't exist. For example, Apple is looking to patent wireless charging of their phones. It's not a problem. It works fine. Charging your cell phone works fine with wires. But they want to charge them wirelessly. So you're going to lose 99.5% of the energy that you spend charging a device wirelessly. You're going to lose 99.5%. Doing that, wasting that energy, polluting the air, and endangering our species and everything around us for a problem that doesn't exist. That's the kind of thing man is doing. Absolutely stupid.